Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jasmine Nolan Echols. I'm calling the work group meeting 3 to order. The primary aspect of today's meeting is to discuss, debate, and deliberate pertaining to the recommendations to be put forth from work group 3, effective February 19th, and to be discussed by the total body in the March public meeting. I'm going to yield the floor now to Commissioner Crossland, Commissioner Bovo, that have established recommendations by way of a summary document that should have been received and distributed to the public to date. Thank you.
Commissioner Crossland, you are on mute. I'll quickly tee it up. Oh, did you want to?
I was just going to say the document is available on the Charter Commission's website. There are a grouping of documents that are titled Commission Documents. And if you go to view all commission documents, there is a folder for Work Group 3. I'm going to place that in the chat for our member of the public who's attending.
Great. Commissioner Crossland, actually, I'll yield to you to go ahead and cover some things, and then I'll piggyback off of what you share. I think it's important to note before we kind of jump in, however, that these are merely discussion points, that I think it's important for us to kind of come to this with a mind of strategy and how we can really implement change based on feedback from a variety of interviews that we've had, research that we've done collectively and also individually. And, I think that that'll be a great baseline for how we talk through some of our recommendations today.
Yeah, and thank you. And one of the things that I want to be clear about in advance is that these are simply thoughts, recommendations of two of the commissioners at this point, Commissioner Bovo and I. They are not of the group in entirety. There's been no formal discussion. What will come out of this group discussion today and over the next couple of days will in fact be recommendations that are presented by the 19th of February so that they can be discussed then by the larger group and may in fact become part or not part of the final recommendations at that point of the commission. But these are some thoughts. What it became clear as we moved through this process and the interviews themselves were that the issues that we were facing at city government very complex, and the ability to be able for us as a group to simply sit down and articulate all of those issues and write them down at that point and then submit them on the 19th might be a bit of a challenge without some kind of a broad roadmap from which to start. Given the fact that not everything that one or two people recommend are really the right way to go, this is simply a roadmap, and it's also not set in stone, as it says in the introductory paragraphs. This is simply something to start discussing from, so that the voices of all of us are included in the final recommendations that we place with the board. But my experience, at least over the years, and I'm sure the experience of the rest of you here, is that if you have something off of which you can react, then sometimes it's easier than just starting with a blank page. And so this is the something off of which you can react. And as I said, some of these are good, some of these are not so good. I would, in advance, like to actually make one correction. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton, because there is an error in here. Some of you may know that I served in Work Group 2 before being transferred to Work Group 3. And as part of that, I was privy to another conversation, and I misunderstood something that I heard in it. And so there is an inaccuracy in terms of a designation. And so if under page 2, where it says establish an office of public advocate, if we were to strike the words out of the third line, and simply put the semicolon after oversight committees and then strike currently overseen by the city councilor's office.
Commissioner Crossland or Commissioner
Yes.
Bobo, if you all could share your screen to the document that we're referencing.
All the panelists have the ability to share. Anybody can share whatever you want to share.
Commissioner Bobo, do you want to pull it up from your Google Drive, or that might be the easiest way? But that should be the only change at this point, only major material change in the document that's posted at this point is to delete that one phrase that we're requesting out of there, because it is not, those oversight is not under the purview of the city councilor's office. Anyway, I am not going to go through this document in detail after detail, but to simply talk about some clusters at this point of items, and I'll start out by tackling the bundles 1 and 2, and perhaps Commissioner Bobo then would tackle bundles 3 and 4. But here we go.
Is everyone able to see my screen okay?
I can see it, yes.
Okay.
Okay, and so as I said, what we tried to do here was to help with a little bit of context in terms of what had been gleaned from some of the conversations, and then to make a series of draft recommendations to start the conversation around how we might address some of the issues that have impeded government, and as a consequence has made it difficult, if not impossible, for the constituents of St. Louis to really receive the services and information they are entitled to as residents of this city. So the first one then really has to do with it gets to the heart of accountability. And what we really look at is that the mayor of the city of St. Louis, as we say, is in fact the CEO of local government, and yet because of the core structure of how we govern our city, it is difficult, if not impossible, right now for all of the accountability to really in clear lines of authority to be clear, because of, and this is what we recommend is one of the which is to abolish the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. As we've discussed before, we are one of only a couple cities in the United States that still, in fact, have a Board of Estimate and Apportionment. It is a cumbersome way of being able to do the business of the city. And what we have really, through then a series of if one were to abolish the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, then there would be some reactions, some other actions that would have to take place. And so really, it's about restructuring the financial components of the city, the audit components of the city, which is what the second bullet is about. It is about making the president of the Board of Aldermen really accountable to the Board of Aldermen at that point as its leader, and beefing up the legislative components of the Board of Aldermen, changing the Board of Aldermen's name to City Council so that it's more parallel with other cities, and increasing, as I say, the city's council's role in the annual budgeting process by allowing them to increase and decrease line items, making the mayor, giving the mayor the role then of preparing and submitting the executive branch budget to the city legislative branch, and then allowing the mayor to be able to have a veto power over the budget that's finally passed. And so that becomes the checks and balances process that's there, which is budget preparation from the mayor and also from the other branches themselves, a budget then passed by the city legislature and a legislature function, and then the mayor being able to veto with, as in other situations like this, the legislative branch then being able to have the ability to override that vote, that veto by 2/3. But the difference between this and another difference between this and what we have is then, and this was suggested during one of the earlier interviews in another work group that I was in for 3 or 4 sessions before I moved to this one, but then fits within this whole picture of where's the accountability then? Where's the public watchdog accountability function that is missing from this legislative and this executive branch function? Well, it's then held in something that, for lack of another phrase, and this doesn't have to be the title, this doesn't have to be the actual function, but it's like a placeholder right now for us to be aware of the need for this kind of a function, and that's the Office of Public Advocate, which we are suggesting would be elected by citywide vote. And the audit functions then that were previously handled within the comptroller office would be moved to this area, along with the responsibility for oversight committees. And remember that we have deleted then the currently overseen, yes, you can just take that right out of there, and such other responsibilities as need to be transferred to that division to avoid potential conflicts of interest. It should have a separate budget from the executive and the legislative branches, and it shouldn't be subject necessarily to the same budgetary process that we see, because quite frankly, then it is possible for the mayor's office or for the legislative branch to squeeze that function to death by cutting its budget unnecessarily. And so there should be some kind of a function to be able to ensure at a minimum budget with the ability to grow as the functions within that office grow. Now, as I said, this has to do with modernizing a system, offering checks and balances at this point, clearer lines of authority. That's what we keep hearing over and over again, and transparency. The idea to this Office of Public Advocacy is that they would have a budget to be able to have research staff, to be able to publish reports at that point, and to keep the community aware on a regular basis of what's happening and what good government practices are. And it would be separate then from either of the branches, so that it would be able to make those reports without undue political pressures that might otherwise be placed on it. And then the other consequence of this kind of a function would be that bidding and other kinds of shared processes right now could be streamlined so that they were all placed in the executive branch, in a finance department, and related departments, which would make it easier for all of us to be able to do our work with the city without the kind of back and forth that's having to happen right now. Along with this first bundle then is a second bundle, and we're not even sure that this can be done, but it's the heart of the thinking, and something that we want to discuss with all of you. But what we're talking about is an effective legislative and executive functions.
Could I ask a question about the first bundle?
Absolutely.
At the end.
Yeah.
Where you all are considering recommending that the Board of Aldermen and the Office of Public Advocate have their own legal staff, is it also your recommendation that their legal staff defend them when they are when a suit, like when people sue the city, and typically the city councilor, who's part of the administration, defend the city? Is it your suggestion then that these legal team, which I assume would be patronage staff that come and go with elected officials sometimes, would defend the city and be able to make settlements and pay out sums.
You know, these are issues that I don't know, and I'll have to rely on smarter legal people than me to know. I see what you're saying. And I think that that is something that needs to be discussed by we need to discuss that with the larger group and find out what might be the recommendations of a bigger group. It is my sense that the legal and a research is more to provide opinion from my point of view than it is defense, but I could be wrong about that. And so I want to be clear that that I don't have a definitive answer one way or another.
And just something to consider is that if you have multiple places from which legal opinions are coming,
Right.
those legal opinions may not align, right? And then so you
Right.
have, if I'm reading your proposal correctly, 3 places from which you would like the legal opinion of the city to come from. And then we're unsure who would defend those positions once they were taken.
Right. Well, and that might very well be a discussion that the 3 branches would need to have and to agree on in terms of what that should look like. Because I'm outside of that. We're all outside of that process, and you're the ones that really can bring up these kinds of issues and figure out what the proper structure of all of that would be. I had thought
And
of it
I would
as
also
supportive services, but but this is not as I said set in any stone.
And I guess another thing to consider would be when any one of those people who are leading those legal teams or who those legal teams report to is in open litigation with the city, how the lawyer that they have and the legal team that they have been allotted under this recommendation is to behave, right?
Right.
So for example, if the Office of Public Advocate, a person that is elected has litigation against the city, or the commissioners on those volunteer boards that they lead have open litigation against the city, who will resolve and defend the city's best interest in those cases.
Yeah. That's great. I'm glad we've got that discussion into the record here so that it can be something as part of the whole, because that's the kind of information that's absolutely critical to whether whether such recommendations get made or not.
I have 2 questions. I have one in addition to City Councilor's question about the public advocates. It's, what is the context behind the appointment of said position or elected position? And whom would be, if we're talking checks and balances and accountability, in my honest opinion, the checks and balances are probably extremely ambiguous in the city structure right now. But with a public advocate position, per you all's recommendation, what would be the chain of command for said position? And how would it be overseen by the comptroller if up above we are eliminating the checks and balances structure for budgetary purposes and other purposes? Can you all allude to that aspect of the proposal?
The Office of Public Advocate would be overseen in the same way the mayor is, by election of the people for that position, and the election of someone else if that individual does not fulfill their job at the level that the constituents are satisfied with. So this, like the mayor, like the president of Alderman now, would be an elected position and would report to the people. The reason for the position is that it would in fact be an office that would report citywide to the people, and to which the people could go to find out, about good government, and to be able to publish and keep the city members abreast about what's going on in government. There are concerns right now among some of the different people that we've talked with at meetings, etc., that there's really nowhere where constituent issues get addressed, where there are where there's an individual who's really responsive directly to the public, but not for functions for information and transparency. The controller doesn't have anything to do with the Office of Public Advocate. Under the modeling that is within this section, as discussed, the controller position would really move to the executive branch and would no longer have that function within the particular within because the ENA wouldn't exist anymore. But the controller and the finance would all become part of a larger finance department within the executive branch. The audit function that previously was within the controller's purview would go to the Office of Public Advocate, because that would allow that individual, that office, to actually perform audits of both the executive branch and the legislative branch, if necessary, with the greatest amount of balance as possible. Right now, for instance, if you were to think about it, the audit function is within the controller's office, but if an issue is within the controller's office, then how do they audit themselves? So separating that out becomes functionally more balanced than leaving it the way it is now.
And what if the issue is in the Office of Public Advocate? Who audits them?
That becomes a public issue then, in terms of the media and the electorate at that point, and a recall process if necessary.
We don't currently have, so what the public has communicated to us to date in both research report and public comment, and in our operating document that we've gotten from City Councilor's office, the aspect of the people holding these particular offices and additional offices accountable to roles, responsibilities, or expectations, or hearing them, hasn't been established or isn't currently in place. So how would eliminating ENA and adding public advocates in these types of aspects increase the opportunity for the public to engage with city government? I'm trying to, because the concept is to eliminate the separation of powers, is what I'm gathering thus far in the proposal that you are presenting.
Yeah, actually,
So we're
the concept,
adding layers to it. And I think, Tiara, if you have, sorry, I can yield the floor to you if you have something.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go now, or
You can go ahead.
Crossland, do you have something that you want to?
Well, I was just going to say that it's not about separation. It's not about eliminating, adding to separation of powers. It's actually about aligning functions so that there's greater accountability, because there's a chain of authority. For instance, now the mayor's office is held accountable for a lot of things that have to do with financial, and the reality is they're not within the mayor's purview. They're in the controller function. So by dividing it up the way it is, we not only separate out the audit function, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, is a potential conflict of interest, but we add we fold the finance department functions into the executive branch, so that all of the finances for, quite frankly, the largest unit of city government flow together more efficiently than they perhaps do right now.
So Commissioner Crossland, just from your explanation of your proposals right now, I think I'm a little confused on your recommendations. So are you considering the position of the comptroller to be solely a part of ENA? And I guess my question is, you have abolished the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, but you also have abolished the position of independently elected comptroller, but in your explanation, you bundled them together as if are you going to keep the comptroller function and just eliminate ENA, or are you eliminating both?
You're right. Maybe we need to look at the wording of that a little bit better, because the function itself, the balance of the function other than audit would go to the executive branch. Whether it's called the controller or not would be within the purview of the executive branch. But the intent, at least, of it here is that that the controller function within government right now, as independently structured right now, would be abolished.
So
does that make it clearer?
Can we be a little clearer? Because the comptroller's function, we have the comptroller herself as a elected official, and then we have the comptroller's office, who has its own functions, including audit and internal audit, and then federal grants. We have a whole lot of different things going on in our office. So are you suggesting that we keep the comptroller as a position, or are we eliminating the comptroller as an elected official, keeping the comptroller's office in their functions and just separating out auditing? I'm just trying to figure out where your thought process is on this one.
Most likely what you're alluding to. But once again, this is a thought piece, and so this is a great conversation, because it's always one of those things about the devil being in the detail. And so when you start drilling down on some of these things, there are layers to it. And so it's great to have these conversations and suddenly start so the idea is the functions of the controller's office are still important and need to be performed within government. And so it is not, at least because we're looking at big picture things. One of the things we have to remember is the control of the charter, at least from the point of view of this document, the charter is the overarching document. It's not the one that provides the details, down to the line of where somebody is, what their chain of authority is, and what the office, org chart looks like, and that kind of stuff. That those kind of functions should be enabled within the different branches of government. But it was not the intention that we eliminate the controller functions themselves, simply that we eliminate the independently elected controller and the ENA, and that those functions then would be folded into government in the executive branch, other than audit. Does that make sense? Am I right about that, Brianna?
Yeah, I think that's something, to your point, Commissioner Crossland, that we're going to have to specify and spell out. I think this has given me a lot to think about, and perhaps all of those on this call. And I think to the point of Commissioner Thomas, that it's probably best for us to be a little bit more descriptive, as opposed to leaving some things to nuance. While the charter itself is more of a constitution document for the city, I think for the purposes of explaining kind of the background and the thought process behind some of these either wording changes or thoughts around ways that we can modernize and standardize these areas that we've been assigned within the charter, it does make sense and kind of gives me some things to think about, rather, before President's Day on Monday, and ways that we can perhaps update this to reflect kind of some of the discussion points made thus far. And at the same time, because this is a work group session, we may not have all of the answers at this moment. You know, as mentioned at the top of this call, this is kind of the result of wanting to get something on paper. And so really this is kind of achieving what it is we wanted to have, is like really robust discussion, understanding what would be necessary in terms of language to better communicate, or to communicate clearly what it is that we're trying to achieve. So I do want to kind of throw that out there, because there may be some pieces and elements of this that we do need to tighten up. But I'm glad that we have this and we're having this discussion, because you're giving us a lot to consider and think about as it relates to this specific proposal.
And also, to that point, just something to consider in your explanations of all of this, your comment around bringing the functions of the comptroller's office, or the comptroller, however you decide to rewrite it, into the executive branch. As it is designed currently, it's already a function of the executive branch of government.
Yeah.
So that's just where my conflicts come in with understanding what your proposal truly is. Because even with the abolish of the position of independently elected president of the Board of Aldermen, you're still going to have a president of the Board of Aldermen. You just want it to be internally decided. So are we really abolishing that position, or are we just restructuring the way it's decided? So it's just something like that should be a little bit more clear.
That's excellent. That's an excellent observation. Thank you very much for it. And I think we do need to be language can be misinterpreted so easily. And the more conversations we have about this, the stronger any proposal is going to be. Let me also say that this is simply the proposal of two of us, and other proposals, including not abolishing the ENA and leaving the controller position the way it is, and tackling tackling efficiency and accountability through other kinds of means, are certainly welcomed and will be vetted, and discussed the same way this one is. It just happens to be the only one on the table right now, but it doesn't mean that it has to be the only way we go. I want to be absolutely clear about that.
No, thank you for the discussion.
All right, let's go into number 2. This one is very broad, and it has a concept in it, and actually City Councilor Hamilton may be able to help us understand whether this is even possible or not, because it may in fact be the easiest way to go, but it may not be the most possible way to go with regards to charter reform and amendments. But the idea to this one is that city governments must constantly evolve in order to be able to meet the needs of its ever-evolving constituents. And that it perhaps isn't our business to be worrying every time somebody needs to rename a position or a department, or you need to take part of one department and add it to another department to create a new third department, as we've heard in some of the meetings, is really highly recommended for instance, a Department of Transportation, etc. A charter perhaps doesn't need to be refined at that kind of a level, refined and defined at that kind of a level, unless law requires it, and this is where we get to. So what we have played around with here is the idea that within the executive branch and the legislative branch, and it probably should say the public advocacy branch, that these entities are able to reorganize themselves, that they can rename themselves, they can reset their departments, they can do everything, as long as They don't conflict at that point with any local, state, or federal laws. And as long as such organizations must align with the city's operating budget and personnel policies and procedures. So the structure itself is less, as long as it is it is set within those kinds of boundaries, would be the purview of the heads of those particular branches. And I would really appreciate us having some discussion around that, because that is probably the biggest question mark that I at least had in this whole document, was whether we are capable through charter reform of even making offering an amendment that would be that broad. The second one that's here, and I'll just get this out and then we can talk about this bundle, has to do with following established personnel policies and procedures. The mayor will have the responsibility for hiring and employment termination of all cabinet level employees, except when a commission or other charter approved entity is specifically delegated that responsibility. And I wondered, I threw that in because I'm not sure that the mayor is able to, and you'll know this, Councilor Hamilton, but hire the airport director, for instance, or does the commission do that? You know, I don't know some of those kind of things. And so that was why there was a little bit of waffling in that one. But in terms of those two bullet items, it is the way to streamline government. It is a way to streamline government, but is it even possible to be able to do so using this kind of a strategy? I don't know. If we could, then, you know, it's our thought that, you know, that we can respond to emergencies more effectively. We can create structures more timely, you know, be more responsive to constituent needs as they evolve, without having to go back and do the laborious work of having to do a charter reform every time something changes at that point, and then has a counter change somewhere else in the charter reform as well. Questions, comments?
My question is probably from the business perspective, but I'm going to try to make it as governmentally friendly as possible as it relates to, again, the accountability and the aspect of streamlining. If you have directors, departments, officials, as we know, these roles turn over. As we know, these positions are some elected, some not to this degree. If we have people coming in and out from the public in these positions, creating structural components of the city that only exist while they're in office, no longer exist when they aren't, and they kind of flexibly get to create that kind of infrastructure, I would caution us doing or considering a proposal recommending said fluidity, because it gives layers of autonomy that, again, lead to that ambiguous aspects of, okay, I want 4 departments because I'm elected, and then those 4 departments aren't reflective in the charter, therefore they have no governing structure. And it's, again, very similar to what we're seeing happening currently. So if you all could communicate what your thought process is around the outcomes of having such fluidity. And since we've already started with the elimination of an accountability structure with the checks and balances with the Board of E&A, if we have a finance, and again, from a business perspective, if I have a finance department who's created 4 or 5 different departments around itself during a term, and there's no governing structure around that, I don't find that to be streamlined, efficient, or effective. I find that to be a huge conflict waiting to arise. But that is just my experience related to said fluidity. And I'm not sure if again, we can continue to have the discussion around you all's proposal pertaining to that, but I foresee some of that occurring if this is the proposal that's going forth pertaining to people being able to create departments, change titles, change names, change functionality, as we change over these positions during terms and seasons of government.
And I would just, I'm approaching this kind of more with questions to make sure that we're thinking through some issues as opposed to recommendations and things like that. But I would say that you might consider whether this proposal means, when you say follow established personnel procedures, that employees who are currently patronage employees would then be civil service. So is that what you mean to say, or no? Do you mean that the legislative branch would then have civil servants underneath it, or you know, that's just something to consider when you say follow established personnel procedures.
And also, just from taking the same approach as Counselor Hamilton, not giving you any recommendations, but just something to think about and consider. From my experience being in different cities and government, and during times of, you know, transition of power where offices have changed names, departments eliminated some departments. And I know Dr. Nolan Eccles came from a business standpoint, but I know community outreach and engagement is important for you all. Just consider the same conversation that you had around who to go to with Department of Transportation and things like that. If we have a Office of Community Engagement during this administration, but now it's something else or it doesn't even exist at all, just imagine how, consider in your proposals how you would streamline services and how the community will react to that and know where to go for certain things. And how that affects, you know, budgeting line items and things like that. And so I think that's really important to think about as you go through your proposals as well.
Well, those are all excellent comments. I also came at this from a business perspective, being the CEO of a not-for-profit with 100 and some employees for over 40 years, and appreciated the fact that probably in those 40 years, at least 6 times, we restructured because the environment was changing in such a way that that it was necessary to do so, and it meant new titles and new organizational structure, et cetera. And it meant really good marketing and communications to be able to not lose sight of what had happened and what was happening and how to communicate that to the public. Yes, absolutely. Everything you're saying is true. There's a flip side of it, which is, as I mentioned, the flexibility that's there. Along with flexibility comes absolutely everything you're talking about there. So if there is a way to be able to strengthen the statements that are in there, then that's certainly something that we should be looking at doing. Or if there's an alternative statement that you prefer within that section, then that's certainly something that we could look at too. I don't have strong feelings about it one way or another. I just would like us to not have to get into the weeds and try to name everything and name everybody, and set a structure that then 2 years down the line we're looking at, and it either wasn't the right one or we have to turn around and do it again.
Okay, and I was just going to mention one other thing to consider as you consider where you're going to come down on these recommendations, is that often, I hesitate to say always, but oftentimes government does not have the same flexibility as a not-for-profit, which sets its own mission, or its board does. You know, the city is a subset of the state, and the state is a subset of the feds, and we have certain obligations that we have to adhere to regardless of who is elected to do what. And so how the flexibility impacts the city's obligations under the law is something you kind of want to consider.
Well, and it may well mean that the flexibility that we fear in some ways is not the reality, because there are still so many other layers to which the city will have to respond, that this will give them some opportunities to make changes, but not the kind of dramatic things that that we might otherwise fear. Brianna, do you have any comments about?
I mean, I think this discussion has been really thought-provoking. Transparently, the second bundle was the one that I had more questions about, just as we consider other similar cities of similar size, or even cross state lines and things like that, thinking through what would that look like. And also remembering within our binder, I was the binder that we were originally given as commissioners, and like, what can the charter do and what can't it do? Thinking through those layers along with the layers that you just mentioned, Councillor Hamilton, thinking through how does all that play in if you think about law, policy, regional law, citywide law, and how that all plays in. So that this section is something that I might actually need to sit with a little bit more, speaking personally. But these are thoughts that certainly were brought up because of, at least to the extent that the public has come to some of our meetings and expressed a desire to have an understanding of who does what and what that entails exactly, and who to go to for certain things. And also thinking through from a larger perspective, you know, what creates a mayoral system that really empowers the mayor to respond to things in a fashion that they think is suitable if they're, you know, the CEO, for example, of the city of St. Louis. So I've been kind of jotting down notes to, again, apply some of the same logic that we have discussed to the first bundle, to this bundle as well, that we probably need to do a little bit of research, and also kind of creating a little bit more verbiage so that it's more clear as to what we're actually proposing.
Great. Maybe we should go ahead and move on to three, the third bundle, since I notice we're starting to get deep into the hour.
Yeah, for sure. So I will jump on this, and Commissioner Crossland, if I miss anything, please do follow up. But essentially, based on some of the interviews and, again, research that we have conducted, we were thinking through how we could standardize the personnel department so that it does reflect current times, and also has enough malleability to work towards a more equitable HR function for the city of St. Louis in the future. So some of our draft recommendations are to rename the personnel department, which again would make it more current, and then provide that director have, you know, have certain things in place so that if they do abuse their power in some way, or there is a cause for removal based on violations, that there is a route to do that. Next is to remove the city residency requirement for City of St. Louis job positions. We touched on this briefly at our last all public meeting and earlier this month, but it is really difficult to have that as a mandate. And then that kind of creates other issues where we might have to go out and contract certain work, or we might be forfeiting really strong talent because they're not City of St. Louis residents. And I believe it was Vice Chair Sheridan who made the really poignant statement that if we're going to make requirement that they live in the city of St. Louis, then we really should be working towards a St. Louis that people want to live in and reside in and work for. Also reduce the number of eligibles to appointing authorities for filling vacancies and competitive positions. Currently, I think we heard from our previous work group meeting with Director Sonia Gray that the wording can make it to where it's a little bit of an obstacle sometimes to get the appropriate number of candidates for a role. And that can slow down hiring time and onboarding time and just create vacancies within the government. Also adopting language processes for those who maybe English is not their first language, and maybe speaking English isn't necessarily a requirement of the role itself, but they might speak another language, perhaps Spanish or some other language. And so we want to be more equitable with that piece of it. So the intended outcomes, I'll quickly go through these. We can expand the pool of job applicants, more equitable access for the jobs available, reducing vacancies and making the time to fill a little bit quicker to fill these roles, and then more modernized personnel policies, language, procedures. And I do see a typo, so I'm going to fix that. And so those are the intended outcomes for bundle 3. Now, Commissioner Crossland, do you have any other insights to add or anything else that I may have missed?
Why don't we ask for questions or comments
Yeah.
at this point, and then we can go from there.
Absolutely.
The first notice of mention I want to give you all is that the first paragraph alludes to the city has a total population reflecting all ages. The average age of the individuals in the city of St. Louis is 35.5 and some change. We no longer have a residency requirement for employment. It's listed on the website in the information that the personnel director gave us and in the operating document, the binder that we were given. And then the only question I have is, Director Gray made mention to the issue of hiring pools of individuals for departments, but departments being reliant or having set subcontractor relationships they would prefer to utilize instead of having or establishing the capacity to train and develop a new workforce that may have been hired by the Department of Personnel. What do you all foresee to be the solution pertaining to that if the proposal is that the personnel director is hiring more eligible, qualified individuals from all parts of the city, if the internal departments are not employing those individuals because they don't have the capacity to train and develop them per her recommendation? What do you all propose as a result in your outcome section?
So for me, I'm a little, for clarity, I'm not really sure that this necessarily adds or diminishes that piece of it. Regardless, I think if there are times and places, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Crossland, but my thought process is if there are opportunities where that is more beneficial or advantageous for people to decide under their purview that it's because of a time crunch or whatever other reason, it's better to use contracting, that's totally valid and fine. This is just specifically because we heard from Director Sonia Gray that getting up to a slate of 5 candidates for a role that they do want to hire, to work internally and not be a contractor, that piece of it is difficult.
Yeah, let me just add to that. Yeah, there's fewer than 300,000 people of all ages in the city of St. Louis right now. Of that population, approximately 66%, I believe, are considered to be of working age. But then you extract from that students and people who are already working and people who are not able to work, et cetera, and your pool gets a lot smaller.
And can I just jump in really quick? Because I can help with this. The state has preempted the city residency requirement, and so the Department of Personnel lifted the city residency requirement in 2023.
For everyone, because I thought that was just for the police.
For everyone.
Oh, okay, because I had understood the fire department, for instance, still had a residency requirement. You're on mute.
There is an emergency sort of thing where if you have a responsive position, typically has to do with public safety, then you can be required to live within a certain radius of a response time.
Okay.
So it's like you have to be able to respond to a scene in this amount of time, right?
Okay. All right. So it's just a question of having to redo the language that was in the charter, whatever. It's not that there is a residency requirement anymore.
And the city may not enforce that residency requirement because it is preempted by state law. So we do
Okay,
not.
then we can just eliminate that bullet and it makes it easier.
Altogether.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And or just say something along the lines of strike this provision consistent with state law.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay, good. Okay, are there other questions or comments about that section? Otherwise, we've got a couple quick ones here, Brianna, if you want to go through those, and then we can talk overall about additional, but we can turn the meeting back to Chair Nolan Eccles about overall or additional recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, I believe, the last one that we pulled together. There were a few comments early on, and some of this you were here for, Commissioner Crossland, and some of it I think you might have been in another work group for, but I feel like this was across several of our work groups. We realized that there were inconsistencies within the language or maybe antiquated language when it comes to pronouns and things like that. So we just want to kind of bundle that all together to update wherever possible, to name, you know, a singular city, to cite the name of an office, function, etc. And then, you know, to use, for example, the mayor instead of even thinking through the logistics. Sometimes it might be a little bit harder to say he, she, and so on and so on. So that's something else to consider. And then the second bullet point is supplies, equipment, materials, which are leased or purchased may be made up for to $10,000 for purchase without advertising and securing bids as otherwise required, which will be commensurate with inflation. So that's another piece. And then the intended outcomes are to facilitate equity and balance out government, which has been a common theme as you've heard today, and then decrease paperwork and increased responsiveness during emergencies. And again, this is a working document. And so I think that's this final piece is kind of summarizing some of the other elements that you've heard thus far today. So yeah. I'll pause here for any other commentary you'd like to add or any other questions or thoughts based on this area.
Yeah, and just quickly to note, the supplies and equipment threshold currently is $5,000. And so the mayor's office request is to double that to 10, which seems very reasonable in this day and age.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other additional comments or questions pertaining to the proposal of Commissioner Crossland or Commissioner Bobo, City Councilor or Commissioner Thomas? Okay.
I see some chat questions here. Are there?
Can we access those questions or members of the public, please?
I can't see them because I'm sharing, so hopefully someone else can.
It looks like it's just links from Councilor Hamilton.
Okay.
Do we have any members of the public with questions that are on? I've done something with my screen here.
I'm quickly going to stop sharing, but again, this document, without some of the things that we've just talked through today, is available on the website for review. We welcome feedback from the public. We welcome additional questions or insight that you may have come into contact with as a citizen of St. Louis. Certainly, we're trying to think broadly and also specifically about the implications and who stands to gain and lose from this, and how we can make a better St. Louis. So I will stop sharing. But again, this document is available to the public.
Yeah.
Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to conclude with thanking you all for your proposal pertaining to what you found to date related to your recommendations and summaries in order to give the public an idea of what your perspectives are. I will create and distribute to the Charter Commission staff what my recommendations and summary and proposals based on the articles we were assigned are to the Charter Commission staff by the 2/19 date. I will encourage us to make sure that all of our proposals are presenting a space and a source of collaboration and partnership with all commissioners on work groups and across the total commission, as that is what it is that we decided we wanted the commission to reflect, is partnership, collaboration, and working within the community by way of engagement. So if you can make sure that all efforts going forward and these are collaborative and of inclusion, and the total document we did from the beginning that has questions on it for you to reference related to your proposal, that also include Commissioner DeWhite's concern with marginalized communities and how they impact and reflect those individuals, and also referencing the special meeting that we just had that gave us insight on what it means to present recommendations that are of the public and for the public so that they can be considered to vote when we are crafting our proposals. And this goes for myself as well, that if it doesn't reflect them, they can't see themselves in it, the chance of them voting for it and us being able to pass these recommendations is going to have the same outcome as the last charter reform efforts. So I would encourage you all, I'll leave you all with that. But again, I'm going to make sure that my individual recommendations are provided, written, and given to the Charter Commission staff so that everyone here is represented and reflected and contributing to the efforts by the 2/19 date, in which Commissioner Hamilton, I'm sorry, I'll do it again. City Councilor Hamilton, if you could make sure that those recommendations get posted to the website as well and added to the Workgroup 3 folder, I would appreciate it.
I do have a quick question if there's time for that. Based on what was discussed today and based on what we are assigned for our work group, I would love to hear initial thoughts that you might have, Chair, about not even necessarily about our recommendations, but about, I know that you've done extensive reading of the charter. So what are your thoughts about some of your proposals, or what have you been thinking about, just so that I think the public can be made aware?
My perspective has always been about the efficiency, effectiveness, and streamlined accountability of the city as a resident, as a commissioner, and as chair. So my recommendations are going to be in alignment with all four of those things for each of our articles. As I've started to draft them, I've been drafting them since we started our very first work group meeting. We started with the low-hanging fruit of the pronouns and the language and all of this. But my recommendations are going to be in alignment, or are in alignment with effectiveness, efficiency, streamlined accountability. So where you all have mentioned some of it in your proposals related to, I don't think is the Board of E&A a article that we are responsible for in Workgroup 3?
It is within, because we have the mayor And we have the mayor within our group. And so the ENA becomes part of it because of the mayoral function. The ENA is actually in all three groups from that point of view.
So my perspective to answer your question, Commissioner Bobo, more concretely is I think that the charter needs to reflect all aspects of the city as it stands today. Currently, it does not. So in order to see a full structural landscape and framework of the city, as you're finding in some of the questions that we've asked and some of the interviews that we've had, the current charter does not reflect all aspects of the city government in order to truly get a full picture of what it is that we probably could be amending. My recommendations are more in alignment with futuristically speaking, where we can take the city with small changes. I plan to have that supported with, I believe, the March special meeting from the experts pertaining to how charters should be crafted and what they should look like and how they truly lay the groundwork and foundation of cities. So my recommendations are more so in alignment with streamlined, efficiency, clear, concise presentation of how the city landscape currently reflects. For example, an example of that is no commissions to my reading, my research are reflective in the current charter. So some of the accountability structure is woven into some of the commissions that aren't listed and some of the departments that aren't listed. And the mayor herself and some other departments have alluded to the absence of those functions being in the charter as a governing structure component. So I think some of those things missing from the charter is adding to the layer of confusion from the public and adding to the layer of unaware accountability structures. They may be in place, but they're not present in the charter itself. And to the concern of others is, should it all be in the charter? And I think because they're governing structures and governing bodies, governing aspects of the city, they should be reflective so that areas like the importance of the comptroller or the importance of ENA or the importance of other aspects of the city can be referenced or can be understood. Constitutional documents, as we heard in our special meeting as well, are often vague for political reasons, not for the purpose of actual governance. So my perspective or my recommendations are going to be in alignment with clear, concise framework design related to the charter for the purpose of the public being able to navigate and formulate where they should be or need to be or need to go or need to communicate pertaining to all things, especially since the organizational structure chart says all aspects of the city ultimately report to the citizens of the city of St. Louis. But the citizens of the city of St. Louis have no means of navigating the internal structures or infrastructure of the city to date. We also heard that in the special meeting from last week.
As a follow-up, you said you've been drafting since the first meeting. Is there anything you can share with us to that point that you've written thus far that you'd like to read for the public?
I think that my readings need to come from a formal document like you all compiled. And when I compile it, in addition to the first document I did when we first started the commission, I'll add it as it relates to all the questions I listed in there pertaining to what the recommendations are. So you'll get that document along with a supplemental document of the recommendations.
Okay.
I think that's great. And it's wonderful to have a couple of different approaches, a lot of different approaches, in fact, because whatever comes out of this work group is also going to be blended in with what comes out of the other work groups, etc. And by the time we get to all of it, we're going to hopefully have something that will really be responsive to the needs of the people, because that's what government should be. Just a couple of things, though, that I want to clarify from my own thinking and thought processes, which are that I would be a little leery of naming all the commissions and doing some things like that, because that goes back to the whole thing about, well, there are some advantages to not having things named, because then when it needs to become something else or blended together or folded in or whatever, you don't have to go back and make a charter change to be able to do so. And so that's a challenge. The other thing is, I do remember from the last meeting with Todd Swanstrom, the special meeting, exactly what what he was talking about in terms of the Constitution being vague. And he did talk about that having pluses and minuses to it. You're absolutely right. It means that lots of things are up for question, but it also, he said, meant that there was the opportunity then for groups to be able to get together and to really coalesce behind different kinds of subjects, and for things to evolve over time as time changes. So that's something we have to remember in the middle of all of this, is that no charter is static, and all it really is a snapshot in time. And what we want to do is we want to be able to stretch that period of time so that it's relevant for the longest period possible.
Thank you, commissioners. If we have nothing else to add, the time is 2:11. We can adjourn our work group 3 meeting. Thank you.